Hello everyone and welcome back to the History of Scotland. My name is Fraser and you're tuning in to episode 60, Lords, Clans, Knights and Merchants in the 13th century in Scotland. Now obviously we were absent, we came back for one episode and then we were absent again. I thought I would explain my absence in the best way I can. So if you remember back to our 50th episode special, I mentioned that my family roots are from Scotland, more so my granddad's side. My last name and first name is Scottish. Well, unfortunately, my granddad on the Scottish side has passed away over the past couple of weeks, so I've kind of been dealing with issues with relating to that, going home to family and kind of just grieving away. Now it was good to see our Scottish relatives and have a bit of a catch up, but yeah, plainly just haven't been in the right frame of mind to get a few episodes done. I am scheduling 2 more episodes this month to carry on. Hopefully we'll meet those, we should do. And we should return back to normal, but I thought I'd be honest and explain why we were absent and then not absent and then absent again. It's just been a rocky couple of months, but anyway, let's get back into some history. In this episode, we'll explore the distinct lifestyles of different societal groups during the 13th century. Now, if you remember to the last episode we did, it was discussing the Parliament of Scotland and how the different Scottish societal groups played a role in the Parliament of Scotland. Today, we're going to be touching upon in more detail these intriguing individuals, so discussing the bustling life of the merchants, the knights and the common folks, as well as the clans and lords of Scotland. Not going into detail of who these lords and clans were, we've already done an episode on that, more on how they spent their lives living. The 13th century was a time of significant change and development in Scotland as we know. The kingdom was consolidating its territories, and with it the social structure was becoming more defined. Lords wielded considerable power both economically and militarily, shaping the landscape and the lives of those who lived on their lands. Clans, with their deep-rooted traditions, provided a sense of identity and belonging with their rich history. Merchants facilitated the trade and commerce, connecting Scotland to the wider world, particularly Flanders and France. And then we had the knights who upheld the chivalric code who came across during the Davidonian Revolution. But also the common folks. They were the majority population during 13th century Scotland, and they worked tirelessly to sustain their communities. To understand the fabric of the 13th century Scottish society, we must first look at the lives of the lords, the people at the very top of the food chain other than the royal family and the kings and queens. These powerful individuals were the landowners and rulers overseeing the vast estates and playing a crucial role in the governance and economy of the kingdom. So, without further ado, let's delve into the lords' daily routines, their living quarters, dining habits and leisure activities to get a clearer picture of their lifestyle. A typical day for a lord in the 13th century Scotland began early, often at dawn. Now, if you remember back a few episodes, we've done this kind of style of episode, a day in the life of a Pict, and the day of the lives in the 12th century as well, where we discussed how these lords and different societal groups lived. We're going to try and follow a similar approach for this for the 13th century, and you'll notice the distinct feudalisation of a lot of these daily routines, obviously starting with the lords who, again, woke up at dawn. Their day would start with prayers and religious observances, followed by breakfast. The morning was usually dedicated to managing estate affairs, holding court, and meeting with stewards, bailiffs, and other officials to discuss land management, taxes, and local disputes. For example, in 1230 AD, the Lord of Stirling would oversee the administration of his lands, addressing the needs and the concerns of his tenants, and ensuring that agricultural work was progressing as expected. Afternoons could involve overseeing agricultural work, hunting, or training in martial skills. Evenings were reserved for meals, socialising, and entertainment. Now, lords manage their estates through a network of officials and servants, similar to how the lords are the networks and officials for the king. They employed stewards to oversee daily operations, bailiffs to manage specific areas of land, and reeves to supervise work on the farms. For instance, in 1235 AD, the Earl of Dunbar relied on his steward to collect rents and oversee the day-to-day running of his estates, while he focused on broader strategic matters and resolving disputes among his tenants. Lords were responsible for ensuring the productivity of their lands, collecting rents and dues from tenants, and maintaining law and order of the king's peace. They also held courts to resolve disputes and administer justice. Now, lords typically lived in castles, which served as both residences and fortresses. These castles varied in sizes and complexities, from simple stone keeps to large, elaborate fortifications with multiple towers and walls. For example, the Earl of Angus lived in Tantall Castle, a formidable stone fortress perched on the cliff overlooking the Firth of the Forth. In some cases, lords resided in large manor houses or hall houses, which were less fortified but still impressive. The interiors of castles and manor houses were furnished with heavy wooden furniture, including large tables, benches and chests. Tapestries and rugs were used to add warmth and colour to stone walls and floors. Decor included items such as heraldic banners, hunting trophies and religious artefacts. For instance, the Great Hall of Bothwell Castle, home to the powerful de Morville family in the mid-13th century, was adorned with tapestries depicting scenes from local legends and hunting expeditions. That is the Moravia family in the mid-13th century. But what did they eat? That's always a big question, especially around my family table. What to eat? Well, the lords enjoyed a varied and rich diet. Meals often included bread, meats such as beef, pork, venison and game birds, fish, dairy products and seasonal fruits and vegetables. They drank ale, mead and wine, with wine becoming particularly popular among the wealthier nobility. For instance, records from the household of King Alexander II, our dead king, in 1226 show that his court regularly consumed imported wines from France and the Iberian Peninsula, alongside locally produced ale and mead. Dining was a more formal affair, often accompanied by rituals and etiquette. Meals were typically served in the Great Hall, where the lord and his family sat at a high table. Food was served in courses, with servants attending to the needs of the diners. An example of this can be seen in the household of the Earl of Mar in 1250 AD, where elaborate feasts were held for guests, featuring multiple courses and entertainment such as music and poetry recitals. Now, what did they do to chillax, as the kids would say? Well, lords engaged in various leisure activities, including hunting, hawking and feasting. Hunting was not only a pastime but also a way to demonstrate martial skills and socialise with peers. For example, in 1240 AD, the Lord of Galloway hosted a grand hunting expedition in the forests surrounding his estates, which included notable guests from neighbouring regions. Additionally, lords enjoyed tournaments and joustings, which provided both entertainment and opportunities to display their prowesses. Now, these style of tournaments were becoming more prevalent in Scotland thanks to the feudalisation of the kingdom. So yes, there was now tournaments happening, and jousting was something that would come into effect during the late 13th century, more going into the early 14th century. In their free time, lords might engage in more sedate activities such as playing chess, listening to music, or participating in the arts. They also spent time reading or listening to religious texts being recited and epic poetry battles. For instance, the Lord of Inverness in the late 13th century was known to invite bards and poets to his court to perform traditional Gaelic tales and songs during the winter months. These examples illustrate the multifaceted daily lives of lords in the 13th century, combining administrative duties with leisure and cultural activities, all within the context of their significant social and political responsibilities. Now, lords weren't the only noble group in Scotland. There were obviously the clans. Now, the clans in the 13th century Scotland were organised around a central kinship group, typically led by a chief who held authority over the clan's members. The chief was usually the eldest male descendant of the clan's founder, and his leadership was recognised through a combination of lineage, personal prowess, and the support from key members of the clan. For example, the Clan MacDonald was led by Alexander MacDonald in the early 13th century, who ruled over the Isles with a combination of military strength and strategic alliances. The clan council consisted of senior clan members who advised the chief and helped in the decision-making process. The chief's responsibilities included leading the clan into battle, resolving internal disputes, and representing the clan in external negotiations. The clan's organisational structure also featured a deputy chief, often the chief's designated successor, ensuring continuity of leadership. Other important roles within the clan included a type of historian who preserved the clan's history and genealogy, and a bard or poet who composed and performed songs celebrating the clan's heritage and achievements. Now, clan leaders such as the chief and his close relatives held significant responsibility, including leading the clan into battles, managing the resources, and representing the clan in negotiations and alliances, especially when it came to dealing with that distasteful King of Scotland who was a more feudal lord and not the good old King of Alba that they respected. The chief's family enjoyed a higher status within the clan and often controlled the best lands. Other members of the clan had various roles based on their skills and status. Warriors were essential for the clan's defence, while others focused on farming, hunting, and craftsmanship. Members of the clan played various roles, with men primarily responsible for labour-intensive tasks like farming, herding, and defending the clan. Women managed the household, prepared the food, and created textiles. Children learned from an early age by assisting their parents and older siblings. Boys would learn to farm, hunt, and fight, while girls were taught domestic skills and childcare. But what was a daily life? Well, the daily life for a typical clan member involved a mix of agricultural work, livestock rearing, and community activities. Men often worked in the fields, tended to the cattle, and participated in hunting. Women were responsible for the domestic tasks, as we said, cooking, weaving, and the childcare, and children helped with the chores that suited their age and were gradually trained in the skills necessary for their future roles within the clan. So, for example, a member of Clan Campbell in 1250 AD might spend their day tending to the crops like oats and barley, caring for the sheep and cattle, and participating in communal activities such as building or repairing houses and fences of their local communities. Women might spend their day spinning wool, weaving cloth, preparing meals, and looking after their young children. Evenings were often spent in communal gatherings, where stories were told and songs were sung, reinforcing the clan's shared identity and culture. Now, the men were responsible for the labour-intensive tasks, as we said. They also participated in hunting and fishing, similar to the lords that we mentioned earlier. This would supplement the clan's food supply. The women helped manage the household with preparing this food and creating the textiles for the men to live in. For instance, boys from the MacLeod clan were to be taught how to handle weapons from a young age, preparing them for their role as warriors. They would also learn to navigate and fish in the coastal waters of their territory. Girls, on the other hand, would learn weaving, cooking, and other domestic skills, helping their mothers in the household of chores and caring for their younger siblings. Now, clan members didn't really live in massive castles. They tend to live in more modest homes called black houses, constructed with locally available materials. These structures had fixed stone walls and thatched roofs made from heather, straw or turf. They were designed to provide insulation against the harsh Scottish climate, because remember, a lot of these Scottish clans lived in the harsher areas of Scotland. So the feudal side of Scotland was more South Scotland and southeastern Scotland, whereas the Great North of Scotland and the Great North and Western area, especially around the Isles, were a lot more, especially for being to Scotland, dangerous to the weather. So this is why the clans dedicated a lot of time to making sure their homes were kept warm during the winter months. In the Hebrides, Clan MacNeil lived in black houses with thick stone walls and thatched roofs made from reeds and grasses. These homes were built to withstand the strong winds and harsh weather of the islands. The interior was usually a single large room where both people and animals lived. This was separated by a low partition. The central hearth provided warmth and a place for cooking. Now the homes were constructed using this stone from the walls and wood for the framework. The thatched roofs were made from material like heather or straw. The interiors were simple, often consisting of a single large room that housed both people and animals, separated by this low partition in the middle. Think of the great halls of the Vikings. They weren't too dissimilar to how the clan members' great houses were. Now, clan members had a diet primarily based on what they could produce locally. They ate oats, barley and rye, often in the form of porridge or bread. Meat, including mutton, beef and game, was consumed when available, along with dairy products like cheese and milk. For example, the Clan Campbell, residing in the Argyll region, often relied on fishing and hunting to supplement their diet with fish and game birds. Vegetables such as cabbage, kale and root vegetables were commonly grown in small gardens. Wild berries, nuts and herbs were foraged from the surrounding countryside, and drinks including ale made from barley and buttermilk. During feasts and special occasions, clan members might enjoy more elaborate meals with multiple courses and dishes, but it was kept very basic on the normal day-to-day. As we said, the food was obtained through farming, hunting, fishing and foraging. These meals were prepared over an open hearth, with stews and porridges being common. Preservation methods like salting and smoking were used to store meat and fish for the winter months. For instance, the members of Clan Fraser would preserve salmon caught in the River Buley by smoking it, ensuring a supply of protein during the lean winter months. Now, we know the clans had a rich cultural traditions, including storytelling, music and dance. They celebrated their heritage through oral histories, reciting tales of ancestors, of the great Pictish heroes and the heroic deeds of the Dalretans. Tartan patterns and clan badges were significant symbols of identity and pride. They came into more effect in the 14th and 15th centuries though. The MacGregor clan, for example, had a distinct tartan and badge that members wore to signify their allegiance and heritage. Bards played a crucial role in preserving the clan's history and culture through songs and poetry. Festivals and gatherings provided opportunities for clans to come together, celebrate and strengthen their bonds. Weddings, births and other significant events were marked with ceremonies and feasts. Now, clans celebrated festivals such as Beltane, marking important agricultural and seasonal changes. These events included feasting, dancing and ceremonies to honour ancestors and deities. For instance, during Samhain, the MacLeod clan would light bonfires and perform rituals to protect against malevolent spirits. Weddings were significant events as well. As we said, they often were more elaborate, involving multiple ceremonies of feasts that could last several days. Now, clans weren't dissimilar to the lords. They did interact through alliances, marriages and trade, but conflicts were a little bit more common. They often negotiated with the lords for protection or autonomy, sometimes swearing fealty in exchange for land and security. For example, the Clan MacDougall formed an alliance with the Lords of Loin, which provided mutual benefits in terms of defence and resources. But clan life wasn't a non-conflict ridden life. It did involve a lot of disputes over land, resources and Honour. Raiding, known as reaving, was a frequent cause of skirmishes. For instance, the feud between Clan Cameron and Clan MacToosh in the late 13th century involved a series of raids and battles over territorial claims and rivalries. Honour and reputation were crucial in clan society, and insults or perceived slights could lead to violent confrontations. Clans often competed for control of valuable resources such as fertile land, grazing areas and fishing rights. These conflicts could escalate into long-standing feuds that sometimes lasted for generations, and this is why the clans and the clan society clashed with the feudal normalisation of Scotland, and this is why the kings of Scotland really did struggle keeping the clans under heel during their reigns. That's why every time we have a new king come to the throne, there is some type of clan uprising in the north. Anyway, that's the hierarchy, at least the top of the hierarchy, with the lords and the clan leaders and the clan chiefs. But what about the merchants? Now, in 13th century Scotland, merchants occupied a middle rank in the social hierarchy, positioning them between the nobility and the common folk. Merchants played a crucial role in the economy by facilitating trade both domestically and internationally. They brought in essential goods such as salt, wine, spices, and textiles, which were not locally produced. This trade not only enriched the merchants but also stimulated local economies, creating jobs and promoting the development of towns and cities. For example, merchants in bustling towns like Berwick-upon-Tweed were key players in the local economy, facilitating trade and bringing in goods from across Europe, which helped alleviate their social standing. Other examples is the prosperity of Aberdeen in the 13th century, which was significantly bolstered by the activities of its merchant class, who traded with ports in the Low Countries of Europe and Scandinavia. But what was the daily life like? Well, a typical day for the merchant involved various activities centred around their business. Early in the morning, merchants would visit the markets to check on their goods, meet with suppliers and negotiate prices. They would spend their time in their shops or warehouses, overseeing transactions and managing inventory. For example, a merchant in Edinburgh might start his day at the city bustling market square, negotiating deal and inspecting shipments from the continent. Afternoons were often spent maintaining records, corresponding with trade partners, and planning future ventures. In the evenings, merchants might attend social gatherings or guild meetings to network and discuss business opportunities. Their day-to-day activities required a combination of shrewd negotiational skills and detailed record keeping, which helped with the strategic planning of their business. Merchants managed their day-to-day business by maintaining detailed records of their transactions, inventory, and financial accounts. They relied on a network of suppliers, customers, and trade partners, often developed over many years. To ensure the smooth operation of their businesses, merchants employed apprentices and assistants, who helped with various tasks from bookkeeping to physical labour. For example, in the trading hub of Perth, merchants kept the ledgers to track the flow of goods and manage their credit agreements. Now, merchants typically lived in houses that were located close to their places of business, often within the town or city walls. These homes were usually multi-storey buildings, with the ground floor used for commercial purposes and the upper floors serving as a living quarter. The homes were modest compared to the castles of the nobility, but more comfortable than the simple dwellings of the common folk. For example, a merchant in Stirling might live in a 3-storey house with a shop on the ground floor, a storage area on the second floor, and a living quarter on the top floor. Merchants enjoyed better living conditions than the commoners due to their wealth, which allowed them to afford these larger homes, better furnishings and a variety of domestic goods. However, their homes were not as grand or fortified as the castles of the lords. While merchants had access to luxury items and could afford to decorate their homes with imported goods, they did not have the extensive landholdings or the feudal power of the nobility. Now, what type of goods did the merchants take? Well, the merchants in the 13th century, as we've discussed many times, collected and dealt with items such as wool, hides and fish. These were the major Scottish exports. In return, they imported goods such as salt, wine, spices, cloth, and metalwork. For instance, the merchants of Dundee were heavily involved in the export of wool to Flanders and the import of fine cloth from France. Key trading routes, including the connecting lands across Scottish towns and ports with England and the continent, as well as sea routes across the Northern Sea to Scandinavia, the Baltic states and the Low Countries, these were all important areas. Important markets were located in towns such as Berwick-upon-Tweed, Aberdeen and Perth, which served as these major hubs for distribution of goods. Merchants would also participate in seasonal fairs, such as those held in Roxburgh, which attracted traders from all over Britain and beyond. Now, merchants faced numerous challenges and risks, including piracy, banditry, and fluctuating market prices. Political instability, such as conflicts between Scotland and England, could disrupt trade routes and lead to loss of goods and ships. For example, merchants trading out of Berwick-upon-Tweed had to navigate the dangers posed by pirate attacks in the North Sea and skirmishes that erupted between Scottish and English forces. To protect themselves, however, their goods and merchants often travelled in convoys and employed guards. They also formed guilds and trade associations that provided mutual support and protection. Merchants would take out loans and insurance policies to mitigate the financial risks associated with their ventures. Additionally, they relied on fortified warehouses and secure transport methods to safeguard their merchandise. Now, for example, merchants in Aberdeen formed connections with traders in Bruges and other key ports, which helped foster a web of relationships that facilitated the flow of goods and information, helping to bring together a sense of community and networking. Guilds and trade associations played a bigger role in that. They served as a social and political organisation, giving merchants a collective voice in local governance. For instance, the Merchant Guild of Edinburgh was influential in the city's economic and political affairs, advocating for favourable trade policies and protecting the interests of its members. These insights into the lives of the merchants in the 13th century revealed their vital role in the economic and social fabric of the 13th century in Scotland. Now, along the similar middle line, there is also the martial prowess of a knight. Now, the process of becoming a knight in medieval Scotland began in childhood and was more profoundly in the southern parts of Scotland, as I said, in the feudalised areas. A young boy of noble birth, typically around the age of 7, will be sent to serve as a page in the household of another noble. As a page, he learned basic skills such as manners, horseback riding and basic combat. At around 14, he would become a squire, serving a knight directly and assisting him in battle and daily duties. This stage included rigorous training in arms, horsemanship and the code of chivalry. Finally, upon proving his skills and loyalty, usually in his early 20s, he would be knighted in a formal ceremony. Now, this wouldn't sometimes follow the same trajectory as we know Sir William Wallace, who later became a legendary Scottish hero in our future, would have undergone a process in an early years similar to this, but because his life is shrouded in legend and is less formalised than the traditional knightly paths, we can assume a lot of the Scottish society, since it was quite new, this feudalisation of Scotland, it might not be a rigorous process like this. Now, training for knighthood was an extensive and multifaceted path. It included the physical conditioning of mastering weapons such as a sword, lance and bow, and learning the arts of horsemanship and jousting. The daily life was, when not engaged in warfare, was very structured and disciplined. Their days typically started in the morning with prayers and a hearty breakfast. The morning hours were often spent training in martial skills, such as practicing with weapons or riding horses. Afternoons might involve overseeing their estate, managing land, and attending to their vassals and serfs. Evenings were reserved for socialising, reading and preparing for the next day. For instance, a knight under the Earl of Moray would spend his days ensuring his fief was productive and well defended. Knights typically lived in fortified manor houses or castles granted to them as part of their feudal tenure. These residences were less grand than those of the lords, but still substantial, providing protection and a base of operations. The living conditions were relatively comfortable, with multiple rooms and a great hall for dining and gatherings, and quarters for family and servants. For example, Sir James Douglas, a loyal supporter of our future King Robert the Bruce, resided in a fortified manor house at Douglas Castle. The homes of knights were more substantial and fortified than those of the commoners and merchants, offering better protection and comfort. Unlike the sprawling castles, however, of the lords, knights were often more modest, but still featured defensive structures such as walls and towers. Commoners lived in simpler, unfortified homes made from wood and thatch, with far fewer amenities and comforts. The Code of Chivalry was a set of ideals that governed the behaviour of knights. Key principles included bravery, loyalty and honour. Knights were expected to protect the weak, but be courteous to women and demonstrate the unwavering loyalty to their lord and king. They also expected to uphold justice and fight for the Christian faith. For example, Knights of the Order of the Thistle, Scotland's highest order of chivalry, were expected to embody these virtues in their conduct. Now, a knight was a primary military role. The duties included serving as a heavily armoured cavalryman, leading troops into battle and protecting their lord's interests. They were expected to provide military service in times of war, including participating in campaigns and sieges. Knights also acted as local enforcers of their lord's authority, ensuring peace and order within their territories. For example, during the Battle of Bannockburn in the 14th century, the knights played a crucial role in the decisive victory over English forces. Knights prepared for battles and campaigns through constant training and participation in smaller skirmishes and tournaments. They maintained their armour and weapons, ensuring they were always battle ready, and on campaigns, knights would travel with their retainers and squires, forming part of the lord's or king's retinue. They were responsible for leading their men, planning strategies and fighting on the front lines. The Scottish knights who followed Robert the Bruce into battle were well prepared through years of training and experience. They participated in further leisure activities, of course, of hunting, hawking and tournaments like the Lords, and they liked to hone their skill to be the very best at these tournaments and jousts. Because it provided opportunities to demonstrate their martial skills, it allowed them to gain honour and recognition and win prizes. Tournaments also allowed knights to build reputations and form alliances. For example, the tournaments held in Stirling attracted knights from all over Scotland and beyond, offering a venue for displaying prowess and forming a valuable connection with other knights. These details, although very short, show the lives of these knights in the 13th century Scotland, highlighting their dual roles as warriors and landholders, bound by a code of chivalry that influenced their actions and aspirations. This was all relatively new to Scotland, and it still was taking some time to take hold in the majority of the country, but especially in the southern parts of Scotland, knights were becoming more profound. Now, last but not least, the common folk. Well, they were known as peasants or serfs, but it's easier to call them the common folk. Their role was to work the land, produce food, goods and services that supported the broader society. For example, tenant farmers worked the fields owned by nobility, providing essential agricultural products that fed the population and supported the economy. Farmers grew crops and raised livestock, which provided food for the entire community. Artisans and tradespeople produced goods such as clothing, tools and household items, and labourers performed various manual tasks necessary for the maintenance and development of the community. Now, a typical day for a commoner began at dawn and ended at dusk. Farmers would start their daily life early, tending to their fields and animals. This included ploughing, sowing, harvesting and caring for livestock. Artisans and tradespeople would begin their work in their workshops, crafting the goods or providing services. Labourers performed a variety of tasks from construction to maintenance. But their retinue was heavily dependent on different occasions. For example, the farmers, their routine was heavily dependent on the agricultural calendar. During planting and harvest seasons, their days were long and labour intensive. During the quieter times, however, they might perform maintenance on tools, buildings and fences. The artisans, they obviously worked in these specialised workshops creating goods such as pottery, textiles or metalwork. Their routine involved a balance between producing items and selling the goods in the local markets and acquiring raw materials. Labourers was a bit more hit and miss. Their work varied greatly, often depending on the needs of the community or the orders of their lord. They might help with agricultural tasks, repair roads, or assist with construction projects. Now, commoners typically lived in a simple one-room cottage made from local materials such as wood, wattle and dub, sometimes thatch as well. These homes had dirt floors and minimal furniture, often including only basic items like a table, stools and straw mattresses. Living conditions for commoners were rudimentary compared to those of the lords and knights. Their homes were small, crowded and lacked the comforts and decorations found in noble residences. Commoners faced challenges such as inadequate heating, poor sanitation and vulnerability to the elements. Despite these hardships, though, they developed close-knit communities that provided mutual support to one another. What about food? Well, commoners had a very simple diet based on locally produced foods. Staples included bread made from barley or oats, porridge and vegetables like cabbage, beans and onions. Meat was a rare treat, usually reserved for special occasions, although they might consume small amounts of pork, chicken or fish. Dairy products such as milk, cheese and butter were more common. Their primary drink was ale, as the common water sources were often unsafe. That's obviously a massive thing that's told in our histories. Food was obtained through farming and foraging and bartering. Commoners grew their own crops as well and also kept small gardens and raised animals like chickens and pigs for themselves. They also foraged for wild berries, nuts and herbs. Food was prepared over an open hearth, which meals would be typically consisting of stews and porridges that could easily be stretched to feed the entire family over multiple days. Now, how did they learn their trades and skills? As being a commoner, you didn't really have, a guild to join, for example. Well, trade and skills were typically passed down from generation to generation within families. Young children learned by assisting their parents and other family members. Apprenticeships were common for more specialised traders, where a young person would work under a master craftsman to learn necessary skills. But what would normally happen is if you're a blacksmith, or if you're an artisan, farmer, tradespeople, you would follow your family's line of that skill. You would very rarely branch out to different skills, as you would just do what your father taught you to do from a young age. Now, community life for commoners was centred around their village or town. They participated in communal activities such as harvest festivals, religious observances and local markets. Social bonds were strong and families often lived close to each other and relied on mutual aid for survival. Community events such as weddings and christenings were important social gatherings. But commoners would still face multiple challenges and hardships. Some of this was obviously paying taxes and rents to their lords, often leaving them with little money left over. They would face health issues for the poor living conditions and limited medical knowledge that led to frequent illnesses and high mortality rates. Workload was long and grueling with long hours, especially physical labour during the planting and harvest seasons. And they had a lot of exposure to famine, disease and harsh weather conditions, not to mention the hardships that war would bring with the reaving of their local areas. Commoners coped with their hardships through this strong community bond that I mentioned, with providing support to one another. They relied on a shared labour during busy times such as harvest and provided aid to each other in times of need. This would help Scotland foster a massive community orientated culture, which when the English would come to invade during the Wars of Independence would actually help when the rebellions of William Wallace and Robert the Bruce would come to a head. These insights into the lives of common folks in 13th century Scotland reveal the resilience and the vital role they played in the broader society. Their hard work and community spirit were essential to the functioning and development of medieval Scottish society, and as I said, it's going to help the Scottish kingdom as a whole function when it gets invaded by the nasty English in the coming years. Well, anyway, that was the lords, clans, knights and merchants in the 13th century. Hope these past few special episodes have helped set the stage for the coming events in Scotland's history. I believe before we jump into the final Dun-Kilded King and then the Wars of Independence that it was crucial to set the scene for how things have changed from our last catch-up during the 11th and 12th centuries. Things are changing, but they're becoming a lot more static now, with the feudalisation process being pretty much complete in the areas that it was going to take change in. Anyway, next week we will return to our political narrative. Finally, with the King of Alexander III delving back into the intricate web of medieval Scottish society. We'll start off with his regency and how he grew up under the shadow of his councillors and guardians of Scotland during his young age. Our podcasts are released weekly, with our next episode scheduled for next week. Fingers crossed, should be. We aim to deliver 3 episodes a month, providing there's nothing personal that's gone wrong. This hopefully gives you a consistent flow of engaging and informative content. Make sure to follow us on Twitter at The History of SC1, that is at The History of SC1, or like our Facebook page, The History of Scotland Podcast, to stay updated on new releases and engage with our community. And these are obviously the places where I'll let you know if there's ever a delay in episodes. We actually have over 100 members in our Facebook group. It's insane. If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave a review on your preferred podcast platform. Your feedback helps us improve to reach a wider audience. As always, you can listen to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, PodBean, and many other great podcasting sites. Before we end, I just want to say big apologies again for the delay in episodes, but also thank you to the new reviews that have been left on Spotify and on Apple Podcasts. I was struggling to figure out where it was from there. Apple Podcasts in the US as well. I've seen all these 5-star reviews come in, and yeah, it's just giving me a bit of a perk to carry on doing the episodes through these hard times. So yeah, really appreciate it, guys. Anyway, thank you for joining me on this journey, and I'll catch you all on the next episode. So have a great week, stay safe, guys, and I'll catch you next time. Peace.